Thanks. Thank you, and welcome to this final talk of the second day. I hope you brought beer or coffee if that's more your taste. But we're happy to be here. And then in Danish we say that this is the rosinen i pølseenden of today, which means that we're the raisin in the end of the sausage. But the quick introduction. My name is Filip. I am the head of technology at Impact.
And my name is Mathias, and I'm a front-end experience specialist at Impact.
And just to start up front with the warning, none of us knows any .NET. So if you're looking for tons of slides with .NET in it, you've gone to the wrong talk. I'm sorry, we'll try to keep you entertained. But I think we have some interesting points nonetheless. We actually think it's a good thing, because we think with Umbraco Headless, the Umbraco community opens up to a whole new variety of developers and fits even better into like an enterprise architecture as well. And that's the kind of the angle that we want to take is we'll go through one of the solutions we built on top of Umbraco Headless and tell you all about the nitty-gritty parts and how they play along together. There's going to be code, there's going to be some configuration, some setup and some architectural drawings and all that kind of stuff, so I hope you'll still get something out of it, but there is no .NET. We love to share, so as soon as we're done here, we'll post the slides online, and if you find any code that you can't find anywhere else, reach out, and we're happy to share anything that you see here. So we do work at a company called Impact, where we do e-commerce. We work for some of the largest brands in Scandinavia, where we do everything centered around e-commerce. And this talk is really a case study. So it's a case study where we'll go through like the architecture of a modern, scalable enterprise e-commerce solution. We'll talk about headless and why we use headless, why we chose Umbraco Headless, and that kind of stuff. The website is built as a single-page app, so we'll talk a little bit about how we do dynamic single-page apps from where the CMS is still in control of routing and all that kind of stuff. And some ideas around how we use Umbraco as the back office for an entire thing, even though Umbraco is actually just a tiny part of the entire ecosystem of the solution. And we'll end up with some notes about forms. If you went to the talk about headless that Morten did yesterday, he mentioned that we talked a lot back and forth with him in regards to forms and in regards to headless overall. And we like to share some of the findings that we've made, and actually also some helpers that we built for using forms on the web today. So the case that we're going to go through is Skoringen. Skoringen is a Danish shoe supplier or shoe store. They have 200 stores all over Denmark, and they have a really large catalog of products, so lots of different shoes, and all of them are, of course, in different colors and different sizes and that kind of stuff. So it's a pretty complex product model, and because of all the physical stores, a lot of what they wanted to do was drive people. Was use the website for inspiration and then drive people to actually go buy the shoes in the stores. So it's very important that we can have up-to-date stock status of individual sizes of individual shoes in individual stores. There's a lot of data that needs to be pretty close to real time. So that, of course, calls for some architectural design, and we'll show and share some of that in a little bit. Scalability is key, of course. Not only is the catalog big, but there's a lot of traffic on the website, and of course for events and for Black Friday and all the usual e-commerce stuff, there's a lot of peaks in traffic, and we need to be able to handle all that as well. For Skoringen, there's a lot of personalization going on as well, where if you're a repeat user, we select content based on who we think you are and that kind of stuff. I won't go too much into that, but it will be part of the architecture drawing that I'll show you. And if you're interested, you can come talk to me afterwards about how we do that and how we do it with the content inside of Umbraco. Yeah. The website is still in development. We plan on go live sometime in Q3, probably, famous last words, probably August, end of August, I would hope for. But just to give you an example of the website, you see it here. It's a single-page app, so there's nice animations when you go around. All of this content comes from Umbraco, but it's all served through Headless. a lot of different spots or like grid items and nice animations when you go around. And here you see there's products mixed in with content also from Umbraco, and you can select the kids' boots and buy a certain boot in a certain size. So that's the website, and the case that we're going to do today, or this talk, is really just us trying to explain how we built something like this and how we would and why we chose the individual parts that we did. So when we build modern e-commerce today, everything's centered around microservices. So we use microservices for all the individual parts of the website. So when you see products, there's probably a product service. There's probably a service for handling whatever you put in your basket. And in this architecture, content is really just a service. So what Umbraco, we actually handle Umbraco as any other microservice. So it's deployed and it's in its own repository like all the other microservices. Some of the interesting parts about that is we choose Umbraco because of what it does for the editor, and how do we then combine products that live in a different microservice? How do we select them on a page inside of Umbraco, and how do we do settings for other microservices inside of the CMS? We really like hosted services, so we use Umbraco Cloud. Of course, that's mandatory with Headless, but even if it wasn't, we would go for cloud, because we really like hosted services where somebody else takes care of all the maintenance work. We use Azure App Search for searching products with Elastic. And a drawing would look something like this. These are some of the moving parts, and this is actually still kind of almost in this is what we show to the client kind of drawing. So there's going to be an even more detailed one, so you can hold the photos for now. But these are some of the moving parts that we see, and the main point to take away here, of course, is you read it from the top. There's a CDN in front of everything, so everything goes through a CDN. That goes for images, but also any API call, any website, any web page being served. Everything goes to CDN, goes through a CDN. Then we have a layer that here we call it experience something touch points. The idea is that we can have multiple touch points. So one of these could be a website, one of those could be an app, one of those could be the POS system or a point of sale system that's inside the store. And they could all use all the same underlying services. Then there is the BFF layer. You see it's the layer that says client 1 and client 2 and client 3 and so on. And the idea with the BFF, I'll come back to that in just a second, but the idea is that each touch point or each endpoint has its own BFF. So it works as kind of a proxy that then handles all the microservices. So the microservices can be shared between multiple endpoints and multiple touch points that the customer ends up using. You see we put Umbraco here in the middle. That's actually more for sales reasons, because they still like to think that the CMS is like a central part of the system, but it's really not. Like a real architecture will have the drawing in a little bit, but it's actually just a service like anything else. So we use Umbraco. On top of Umbraco, we put we call it an Umbraco connector. But what that does is that actually does all the HTTP back and forth with Umbraco Headless, and ends up serving the real JSON response that goes out to the client. So we can do optimizations in the call and take out properties that aren't needed for the user, and we can do some caching in that layer as well. As I said, it's a single-page app, and we do server-side rendering. That's SSR. Server-side rendering, if you don't know, it's really important for SEO reasons. And of course, when we do e-commerce, SEO is just really, really important. It's really important that you can search for whatever boot we showed in the drawing before, and you can actually find that it exists on the Codegarden website, and you can buy it. And in order for that to be working on a single-page app that runs JavaScript in the client, we need to server-side render the first request. So we do that as well, and it's a microservice like anything else. And there's a lot of other microservices in an architecture like this. Some of them are regular Azure web apps where they actually run, and there's a process going all the time. Some of them are Azure functions that are invoked based on some kind of event, like an importer or something like that would run on a schedule or run whenever some task occurs. And then would just fire up and do its thing and put its data in a database or in files or whatever it's handling. Of course, we do logging across all the microservices, but when we build a single-page app, it's actually a lot of the times the stuff that can go wrong and that we can't find in regular tests is actually going wrong in the client, because the client is, our own microservices, we kind of know what kind of system they run on and what kind of versions they're on and all that stuff. But when we push more and more logic to the client, to the browser, it's really hard to know what goes wrong. We don't know what browser they're on and what operating system they're on and what device they're on, and maybe they're using the Facebook browser because they clicked a link in on a Facebook ad or something like it. There's just tons of stuff that can go wrong. And in that respect, it's really important to actually keep track of where your client errors, and so you can track them and squash all the bugs that maybe you caused, and say sometimes this bug is only for weird browsers in weird something, so we don't care about that. Yeah, as I said, CDN is for real. So a more concrete diagram would be something like this, and this is actually still a little bit simplified, but this is a little more, and I don't expect you to actually be able to see all of this. This is just to show that it's a very complicated setup. And you see, Umbraco is this little thing down here in the middle. It connects through like a content microservice, and then it connects up to the BFF, which is the website as a microservice that's up on top of the left corner of the gray box. And then there's a lot of other moving parts, like when you want to sign up for a newsletter, it goes directly to Salesforce Marketing Cloud, or when you want to put an order, it goes through an order service, and that puts it down into the customer's ERP system, or however they want to do it. So it's a pretty complicated setup. Yeah, as I said, this is the Umbraco part, so there's Umbraco Cloud, which is the headless one, and then there's the Umbraco connector on top. So we chose a headless CMS because we run Umbraco, or we run this entire setup as microservices, so they all just communicate with JSON. So whenever we get a list of products, it's just JSON. Whenever we request a page, it's just JSON, and then everything is handled in the client. So that's why we chose to use a headless CMS. Headless CMS is a pretty crowded space. So there's stuff like Butter CMS and Content Stack and Contentful, and recently, like a lot of the traditional CMSs are trying to keep up because the new hot headless CMSs are taking some of their business. So WordPress and Umbraco and like the Episerver and Tycore and all the traditional CMSs that we know, they've come up with some kind of way to do headless in some kind of way. They're different though, and the main thing that I've learned over researching and trying out lots of different headless CMSs is that if you want to build a website with it, like if you want to do just a chatbot or just an app or something, you can choose any of them. That's fine. But if you want to build a website, you should really go for one of the ones that it was a traditional CMS and then turned headless, like Umbraco Headless or one of the other ones, because like all the basic CMS stuff they get right. Like being able to have a page tree with all your pages in them. When you're used to Umbraco, that seems like such a no-brainer, but most of the headless CMSs don't do trees for their data. That's just one bucket of data. Being able to generate URLs dynamically from wherever the page sits within a tree, stuff like that, we take it for granted, but a lot of the headless CMSs don't do that out of the box. So that's why we knew that we wanted to go for one of the traditional CMSs and build on top of that in a headless manner. Then, there's a lot of other features around the CMSs that's reasonable to look at, like do they do image compression or image handling, like cropping and resizing and all that kind of stuff? How do they handle data migrations from one environment to the other? And of course, price varies a lot. If you look at the ones that I showed before, like Butter CMS is pretty cheap, and Content Stack is pretty expensive, and they're targeted towards different targets. Yeah, so they're just very different, and you have to keep all of these in mind when you choose your CMS or your headless CMS. So the reason why we chose Umbraco Headless is we really like the editor experience, of course. We also like the developer experience, like when you click around, and like even for the non.NET people like Mathias and I, it's just really easy to get started to build doc types and all that stuff. You do it from inside of the back office, and it's easy peasy. We really like cloud, of course, that it's as a service and we don't have to deal with all the deployment stuff. And of course, cost is a reason as well. Umbraco Headless is pretty cheap when you compare it to the rest of the competition. So it's Umbraco in the cloud. It is a limited back office that you see. It's not the entire back office. Some of the sessions are cut off. Then, like Morten said, that we've been Morten from HQ, who did the official talk about Headless. He mentioned that we've been working with them, and in that we needed to add some stuff that wasn't available in the way Headless was built currently. So we made kind of a hybrid mode where we got a real Umbraco cloud and then put the Headless on top of that, and we made a lot of learnings out of that. So some of the things that we're going to show today is built that way, and I'm sure Morten would like to talk to you about how we do that and how we plan on doing that for when Headless is really ready. Then the Umbraco Headless is just REST endpoints for all the raw data, so you can query by like a GUID, or you can query by the page's URL and get down the model that represents the particular page. And then there's client libraries for .NET or .NET Framework and for Node, but at the time where we started, none of the clients were really working, so we built our own. And that's really that's also what the Umbraco connector does. And Mathias is going to talk a little bit more about how we actually built that. When it comes to dynamic content, or like in Umbraco, it's the grid. It's a little bit hard because you can use the grid like it's intended, where you do the configuration within, like you type your own JSON out and you configure it that way. And it's a little bit hard to do. It's a little bit hard to get versioning working with that. You can use stuff like Blender, or you can use doctype grid editor or something like that. And we actually ended up going with doctype grid editor as the way we build grids with Umbraco Headless. The challenge that comes with that is that the way the grid works, it just serializes all the values from all the grid items that you set in, serializes it down to a JSON blob. That's how the grid works. So that's what it saves. And Headless doesn't really do anything out of the box. It just gives you back that blob of JSON. So if you have any references inside of it, like if you're choosing an image, you just get a GUID out of it, or if you're choosing, like if you're linking to another page, or you're choosing a page, you just get the GUID of the page and not really the data that you're looking for. So we spend a lot of time. First, we built some pretty ugly workarounds around that, but we spent a lot of time with Morten and the Headless team figuring out how do we want this to work. And I'm not sure that what we are currently using is how they're actually going to do it eventually, but it works now so that. If you have doctype grid editor items in the grid, we actually get all of the data expanded out just like you would expect it to be. Of course, when it comes to dynamic grid, the next generation grid, or grid V2, or whatever we're calling it now, we're really looking forward to that, and we hope that's going to solve some of the problems that we've seen with using grid and Headless today. So the good, the bad, and the ugly. We really like Umbraco and Umbraco Headless because it's very easy to use. It's very familiar when you're used to Umbraco. Headless is more or less the same. It has really nice webhooks. As Morten said, like we can supply a URL, and whenever your pages are saved or whenever something's updated, that URL is going to get pinged, and we use that in order to have a local cache and then clear the cache whenever something is updated. The bad, as I said, references and the doctype grid editor expansion and all that kind of stuff is still kind of dirty, and it doesn't feel like it's ready yet, but of course it's coming. The ugly, I would say, is all the workarounds that we've been doing to actually get this to work. The first site that we launched on with this architecture, or with using Umbraco like this, actually turns around and does HTTP requests for everything when it sees something inside of the grid. So when you're rendering out a page that has 15 blocks with 15 images in them, that's a combined 15 or like 16 HTTP requests before we have all that data. And of course, there's a CDN in front of it, and it's cached and all that kind of stuff. So in runtime, it doesn't really matter. But in development, it really hurts because we have to wait for 16 requests before we see anything. So that's kind of ugly, and we really like the way where Headless is going with this. So just to put in a couple of our wishes for what we want Headless to be, like of course GraphQL is the big thing. We're very happy to hear that it's on the horizon. It's on what they want to do with Headless at Umbraco, and we really want this to happen. Of course, the new blog editor, I see that now it's called the Proteus blog editor. I found that name in the CFP, and you should all go in and upvote that so we can get them working on that sooner. The sooner the better. And some kind of package store like we have today, Umbraco packages, but a lot of them doesn't really work with Headless, and a lot of them are broken in Headless because they depend on something that's not available or something, or sometimes it just doesn't make sense. Like if your package is more like a front-end package that actually has a view and all that kind of stuff, it doesn't make sense in a Headless world. So some kind of way to have a mini package store or an app store, or however we want to brand it, that only has the Headless packages that are somehow curated or something, that would be a really nice thing. And some more detailed webhooks. When pages have like other references, or when other pages refer to a page, it would be really nice to actually be able to know that, so that we don't have to clear all the cache every time anything's saved. That would be a nice thing to work with as well. And some preview functionality. For now, we've just done a dirty CSS hack and put a display none on the preview button, because that's how we don't mess up with the users. But we would like some kind of configuration where we could say use this host name or do something, and then use the URL that comes from Umbraco or something. Yes. A couple of words about how the infrastructure is built. We built CMS-based single-page applications because we want the user experience of a single-page app. So we want like seamless navigations, like you saw when you saw the video, like where there's animations when you go from one page to the other. So we want to build it as a single-page apps. We want to have that performance where we don't need to redraw everything all the time, so we can keep the header and the footer because they're the same on all the pages. We don't have to ship all the extra data back and forth. We only need the data that actually changed. We want all of that, but we also want like the ease of using a CMS for the editor. And the way we built this is as a single-page app. There's a client-side router. But we really want the CMS, or Umbraco in this case, to actually still be the source of truth for what goes on what URL. Because we want the user to be able to rename a page and have the URL automatically reflect that. And we want to be able to serve dynamic content based on that. So we want to do this with actually just having a generic route in the client that matches anything, and then whenever that route resolves, we'll get the content by its URL with Umbraco Headless, and then based on the response we get from that, we'll select a component. In front end everything is a component these days, so we'll select the front page component if the page type is a front page, and so on and so forth. And then all the rest of the data that goes on that page, we'll put that down to the selected component, and then the component can do its own rendering. And we do more or less the same approach for like grid content. So we'll go through all the grid items and see what template is this, and select the component based on that, and then render that out. So in our world, for building, like we are a .NET house and we have a lot of .NET developers, and we really like scalable software, so we build everything in TypeScript, and we do both React and Angular, and we do more or less all the frameworks out there. I just wanted to take some code for those of you who might be doing front end, or for you to take home to your front enders if you want to build something like this. This is how this could look in Angular. I'm not going to go through it very slowly, so you can relax if you don't like JavaScript or TypeScript. But just to show you that it's actually not very hard to get this up and running. So in Angular, we set up routes like this. So you see, it's just one route that matches all paths, and it mounts to a generic page component. And then we say whenever this route is resolved, we should use the generic page resolver. And the generic page resolver is actually just a class that has a method that's called resolve. And whenever we call that, we actually just call out to Umbraco via some kind of API here and get the data back. And that's pretty much what it is. And then inside of the generic component, we take a look at the data we get, we select the component based on that, and then we mount that component in the view and put the data on top of it. So it's actually pretty simple. One thing to note, though, is that if you're using Angular's router, because all of them are the same route, it doesn't trigger as a route change when you navigate around. So you need to do a little thing where you tell it to never reuse a route by just implementing this class. It's not very hard. It's just very frustrating when you don't know this and nothing works when you click around. So server-side rendering, again, as I went through this already, so we do server-side rendering primarily for SEO reasons, for search engine optimizations, but also to be able to have a really fast boot time. Because with client-side apps, especially like if you're on a phone or if you're on a device where the network is a little bit restricted, being able to show the client or the user some pixels that actually has like the product they're looking for, something in them, before all the JavaScript is downloaded and passed and executed and all that kind of stuff, it's just a really nice user experience to be able to have the page already rendered when it comes out. So we do this, we can do it as a service, we have it as its own microservice, we host it ourselves, or it's in Asia, but there's third-party services that does this for you as well, whatever you prefer. And all the major frameworks have a solution for server-side rendering. So whether you're using Angular or React or Vue or any of the frameworks, they can all do this in some kind of way. And one thing to note, I'll come back to this in a second, is it's important that you have some kind of way to disable server-side rendering for part of your DOM tree or part of your page, so that if you have personalized content or something like that, you can turn it off. I'll come back to that in just a second. But just to show you again that server-side rendering is not very hard. In Angular, it's more or less like this. So we have, we have the regular app module that we always build when you're used to doing apps with Angular, and then we just have a browser app module that imports it, and we have a server app module that imports it. And it imports the same app, and it changes out some dependencies, and that's more or less it. And then you have the server-side renderer running in Node. So I was talking about personalization and how we want to do that with server-side rendering. And of course, the reason why it's a problem is that we want to, even though server-side rendering is kind of fast, it still takes some time, and it has to wait for like all the HTTP responses to go back and forth and to be able to actually serve that up. So we want to cache it some way. And that means we want to be able to have one version of the page that we can serve to anybody. And if we do that combined with personalizing some of the parts of the page, it gets a little hard. So let's say that we have like a list of products, and maybe the engine has figured out that I always like black shoes, so it should probably put black shoes on top when I go to a product listing. But Mathias, of course, he likes pink shoes, so when he goes to the page, he should have pink shoes on top. So when that's the case, or it could, personalization could be something like saying hello Mathias when it recognizes that he's the user or something like that. The idea is that you can then have different strategies for how you personalize on top of your server-side rendered content. So we can do it when the client bootstraps. As I said, the server-side render will give you the HTML file that it has. It's going to serve that immediately, and then the JavaScript is going to be downloaded and passed and executed and that stuff, and then the client bootstraps. At that time, from the client, you could repeat the HTTP request, get back the pink shoes if you're Mathias, and just throw out the mixed shoes that anybody should see, and then push in the pink shoes. So we could do it like that. It's probably going to be a little. That's probably not going to be the right strategies for a product list, because that way the user is just about to click on a shoe, and then it swaps out, and it's a different shoe, and he clicks on the wrong one, and that's not the experience that you want to give him. The right way for this example is probably something like doing it at the first user interaction. So we'll show the combined list that has all the shoes in them that's non-personalized, that's the generic one that everybody gets. And then when I say only show the ones that are available in my store, or only show the ones that you have in size 44 or something like that, and the request goes out to the server to do the filtration, then of course the response is going to be tailored to me, because it knows that I'm the one doing the request. And then all the black shoes in size 42 or available in Aarhus or whatever is going to be on top. So that's probably the right way to do it for a product listing. And of course, sometimes the right way is just to say, don't do it in the server-side render. It doesn't make sense to show a generic welcome name. You should probably say welcome Filip, and then just say, just don't server-side render this component. Just wait till the client bootstraps, and then put in the real data. So those are the 3 strategies that we've come up with. Not as like, none of this is really code. It's more like the way you think about what you should server-side render and how you should do it and how you combine that with personalization. And just getting the way out saying we don't want this. In Angular, we built a no server-side render directive. It's just you put in the no SSR as an attribute on any element, and from there on and down the tree, it doesn't do anything in server-side render. Then we come to the BFF. I mentioned this a little bit earlier. It's not best friends forever. It is an architectural pattern called Backend-for-Frontend. And the idea is, as I mentioned this a little bit already, that for each service that we run, like an app and a website and a POS system and all those kind of stuff, they all have a BFF that's tailored just to how they want the data, just to the data that they need. And then they can, in turn, use all the same microservices behind the scenes. We do this for performance reasons, because we want to be able to have the data in only one request, even though it might go out to 3 or 5 or 10 different microservices. We want to be able to just have it in one request to the server or from the client. So we do that with like data orchestration, where we say when we go to the product list page, we probably go to Umbraco to figure out what category to show, and then after that we'll go to the product service and figure out what product should be shown, and then we'll pass on all that data to the client. And then we want it for performance, like with caching. So we want to be able to cache that response, so we don't have to do 10 requests every time, but we can just do the one, and it's going to be really, really, really fast. And like with modern CDNs, you can actually host the BFF in the CDN and run it as a function out there. There's a really nice added feature here that we actually hide all the implementation of Umbraco, so nobody can ever see that it's an Umbraco site, so it's not vulnerable. Nobody can see the URL to the back office, so it's really, really hard to figure out where the CMS actually lives. But talking about performance, in a traditional page, as I said, we would download the HTML, then the JavaScript would go, and then it would start asking for the content service, and then for all the products afterwards. And when we navigate around, we're going to ask for the next content, and then for the next products. So that takes a lot of time. When we introduce the BFF, we of course need to wait for the HTML still, but then we'll get a combined request or response back that has both the content and the products. And that means that when we navigate around, we only have one request again. So it's already by here, it's a lot faster. And then when we combine that with server-side rendering, we actually inline the first request inside of the HTML file, so the first response is even faster, and we don't need to wait for any data in order to be able to bootstrap the app. So it's a really nice experience this way, and the BFF pattern not only gives us like an architectural thing where we can have like backend-for-frontends one for the app and one for the mobile side and one for everything else. It also gives us a performance gain that we really like. Yeah, so just to go over it again, when you go to the boots page, the client asks the BFF for like the content for this store, for this page, and that actually turns down and asks Umbraco on the one side, and then the app search on the other side, and then the BFF will merge them into one and pass it on to the website. And with that, I think I'll give it over to Mathias to talk a little bit about the actual Umbraco connector.
Yeah, thanks. So I'll talk about the Umbraco connector. Of course, that's the next step down in line from the BFF. So where does that fit into the bigger picture? Just to reiterate, I've done a really oversimplified version of this drawing you've already seen. So we have the single-page application that requests the BFF layer. And beneath that, we have multiple microservices. And the connector and internal Umbraco is just one of them. So this is really where the connector has its place. It talks to Umbraco. It does a lot of things that we want to do to the data before sending it to the BFF, where it could be sent to the single-page application and also cached. So yeah, it runs on Node.js specifically for our team. We chose Nest.js. because we're already pretty used to working in TypeScript. We really like to have that workflow, and Nest.js is a Node.js framework that allows us to do that on the back end as well as the front end. So it's a really nice framework to work with. If you've ever worked with TypeScript or Angular, you'd be pretty familiar with a lot of the concepts. You have dependency injection and all of these things that you really want. So a lot of us front-end developers are used to working with something like Express for Node, and this basically just puts TypeScript on top of that and a lot of other really nice patterns. So yeah, that's basically it. So how do we serve content from this connector? What we do is basically write a controller in Nest. This is very simplified what it would look like. So here we can see that we have created a page service. This page service actually does all the heavy lifting of talking to the REST API that Umbraco exposes. So that will, in line 12, get a page by URL that we query through this connector. Now, using a service inside of Nest.js allows us to do a lot of things like transforming the data. So the data on the left side is the data that Umbraco comes with natively. If any of you have ever worked with Headless in Umbraco, you would be pretty familiar with this. So what Umbraco basically does is just lay all of the properties that you've defined on your doc type in the properties object. Sometimes we do not really want that. Sometimes we want to do a lot of the we want to structure the data a little bit differently, and we might want to omit some properties that we don't really use. So in our case, we've done this in the connector because our team, again, to reiterate, we aren't really .NET developers, and then we had this connector, and we found that a pretty natural place to, whenever we take the data, we transform it before we cache it. So basically, we would move some meta properties into their own property and so on and so forth. So having this step really allows us to take it to the next level as well, because Nest.js integrates with Swagger. So we're actually able to implement all our endpoints and type them. Because we're working in TypeScript, we can generate these types through the connector and overcome another obstacle that we have, that the connector is its own completely separate solution and repository. But doing this allows us to actually take this and generate TypeScript interfaces that we can use inside our single-page application, a whole nother repository. So whenever we boot up our single-page application and start building, that actually asks the connector for the latest types, and then the developer working on that has the workflow they're used to with typings of all the API responses that you can get. So that really allows us to have a really nice flow with that. It's basically, if you're unfamiliar with TypeScript, this is basically just duck typing. It's not really hardly typed. It's just about if it walks like a duck and quacks like a duck, it's probably a duck. So that's how that works. But what this basically allows us to do as the developers working on this project specifically is have a really familiar workflow, because we're not .NET developers. So working in TypeScript is something that allows us to have a really quick turnaround on our project. So whenever we create a new property on Umbraco, we just create it there in the back office. We just do a little fiddling in the connector, might change the data a bit, and have that be generated into an interface that we can implement in the single-page application. So that really allows for a pretty neat workflow for us. So we can serve content using this, and we've just basically started going ahead and doing a lot of other stuff in Umbraco that you're probably familiar with, like global settings. And since at the time that we started doing Headless, V8 was still in beta, so we've kind of done our own way of handling labels for translations and stuff like that. But basically all of that is done in the connector as well, and a lot of that actually strips a lot more of the data than our content service might do. So yeah, I just want to touch upon, now that we're speaking of the back office, how we've modified that a bit, because the big thing that we really want to allow editors on an e-commerce solution to do is handling content that does not really exist inside of Umbraco, but resides in a whole other microservice. So, for instance, going back to this simplified slide, we have Umbraco here, and then we might have, in this case, app search that delivers all the products here. So that's a completely different microservice. So the way that we've gone about handling this is creating a custom property editor on Umbraco that's pretty simple, that basically whenever the editor is using the back office, uses AppSearch's own HTTP API to request the products and the possible filters that exist, so the editor can create a little configuration of what they want to be displayed on that particular page. Now, Umbraco saves this configuration as a small JSON object. So whenever we get that from the connector, our backenders can make the BFF actually kick in and ask AppSearch for the real products and enhance the page with that before sending it onwards to the single-page application. So that really allows us to handle that pretty nicely. Also, we've gone ahead and done some back-office styling, because yeah, we're front-end developers, so why not? Another solution that we worked on had this pretty common thing where we had to create the site with a grid, and it's a 12-column grid, but it's centered, and some of the grid spots, and the grid rows more specifically, actually would break out of the grid and fill the whole width of the page. So basically we're looking at something like a 14-column grid, where the 2 columns on the sides are fluid. So we basically went ahead and made a 14-column grid in Umbraco and styled it for a bit, and that just really shows that for us as developers, not knowing .NET, we could get pretty far with just CSS, creating this layout that could kind of mimic what's going on in the front end, and we could tailor the thumbnails to the way that we wanted to have them. So yeah, this is just a CSS for that. So we found that pretty nice, and that's also why we like Umbraco. It's pretty easy to get around to doing that. Yeah, also we've done this thing of reusing the styles that are actually inside of our single-page application repo. So if you remember, this is what it looks like on the page. We've just created this small SAS file that that imports all the styles that we are already using on the site and applies them only to the doc-type grid editor grid, and basically exports this through Node.SAS and into Umbraco, and now we have this pretty much out of the box, so that really helps us along quite nicely. So yeah, the last thing I really want to touch upon is forms. So we had the fortunate opportunity of actually being able to test that in beta and headless as well. So on the back end, there's not much new to talk about. It's basically how you're used to using it, but you have an API now, and we really like that you can actually fetch the JSON and basically skip the whole step of having a razor view that you're bound to that renders the whole form for you. You can render the form in the way that your specific front end requires, or whichever framework you're using. Inside Angular, this is specifically how we would do it. We basically loop over the field sets and generate the form field. So whenever there's a text field, we have a component displaying that the way that we want it to in that solution, and so on and so forth. So, oh, that's just the fan. So basically, we've just put this on NPM. If any of you are using Angular and want to check it out, or if you just want to check it out for inspiration, you can check out this. There's part of it that's actually just a core that doesn't really render the form. So any of you using another framework in the front end might want to take a look at that. That's basically just for handling the simple things like getting and posting to the form endpoint in Umbraco. So that works out pretty nicely. So basically, this is just the body that you put in your post request, and then you're pretty much running. Something to take note of that the page ID needs to be put in there for some things to work, like emails and stuff like that. In regards to our repository, there's a little asterisk on the end of this, because only just recently did we see reCAPTCHAs actually start to work. We worked with Morten again from the headless team to implement this in a headless fashion, and it's worked out pretty nicely. And from what I hear, this is going to make it into the regular Umbraco forms. So yeah, so this is not to be found just yet on our NPM package, but it might in the future. So yeah, in conclusion, I just want to hand this over to Filip.
Yeah, so this was a lot of our experiences and a lot of cherry picking of details from back and forth. So we're pretty excited about where Headless is going. We made this website. Is Umbraco Headless ready yet? .com? No, we actually didn't. But if it was a website, it would probably say not yet, but pretty close. We're pretty excited about it. We don't know where hybrid mode is going to go. Is that going to be a thing? Is that not going to be a thing? Can we run headless on top of regular cloud, or how does it work? It might be an idea for some projects. We really like we need the grid expansion and stuff to work, and there's still some parts of Umbraco where you still need some kind of Razor helper to actually get the data out, and you don't have those available in headless, of course. If you're building packages, start thinking about, does this apply to headless, and how can I make it work for headless? So sharing is caring. We built the form builder that Mathias showed. It's on NPM. We also have a package that has all the routing stuff that I showed for Angular and how it works. It's also on NPM. You can find it. And anything you've seen or that we've talked about, we're happy to share. So some of it is still work in progress. And as I said, the website doesn't go live for another month or three. So it's not all done yet. But come talk to us, and we like to share, and we love to talk to you and hear your expectations as well. So that's it for us. I think we have a little bit of time for questions, but other than that, you can find us on Twitter or on LinkedIn or however you want to connect, or we'll talk tonight at the party. But I think we have a couple of minutes for questions.
We have any questions? It don't look
People
like
just
that.
want to buy beer.
Yeah. But then I think we will give a big applause for Filip and Mathias.